Good afternoon, and today we are going to speak to John from Argyle Life Green and White podcast and get the lowdown from the horse's mouth on how Ashley Phillips and Alfie Devine got out on loan at Plymouth. First of all, John, how are you keeping, my man?
I'm good, thank you. Thank you very much for having me. This is it's fun for me to do this because I when I was a kid was kind of a Spurs fan in addition to being an Argyle fan, which is a very sort of cringe thing to admit these days, of course. But you know, back in primary school, everyone sort of had two teams because Plymouth were at the time, I guess when I became a bit of a Spurs fan, we're in the depths of League One, as it's now called. So yeah, and I still, you know, have a sort of place, a soft spot for Spurs, let's say. And might be able to see over my shoulder, I've got an old Spurs versus Argyle program, which my girlfriend dug up for me off eBay from 1949.
Wow.
Which lived in a frame in the office. So yeah, in short, great to be here.
No, look, I didn't know you were a Spurs fan. Look, before we get into it,
not these days, I wouldn't say, but you know, it's a club that I still like. But yeah, solely an Argyle fan these days.
Do you know it makes a change? Most people don't like Tottenham, especially in terms of Premier League. So it actually makes a change, and it's a breath of fresh air to hear that someone does like Tottenham. But look, first of all, congratulations on escaping relegation. Of course, beating Hull final game of the season, which was absolutely brilliant for you. But the Championship, of course, you got promoted into off the back of last season when you got out of League One. What was your expectations heading into this season in the Championship?
Yeah, I think in terms of my sort of immediate group of friends who I go to games with and things like that, we all sort of do prediction leagues at the beginning of the season. And yeah, I don't think there was anyone who had us higher than like 16th. And I think that was me actually who said we'd finish 16th, which was about where we were in the table when Steven Schumacher, our former manager, walked out to go to Stoke in December before things kind of became very rocky for a few months. So I think you know, if he had stayed, that sort of, you know, finishing there or thereabouts would potentially have been possible. But I think you know, the objective, as opposed to what we maybe expected, was to stay up. You know, I heard Schumacher saying at an event on the cusp of the season that 21st would be a huge achievement for us. And I think you'd be hard pressed to find a fan who wouldn't have said similar. You know, we have a tiny budget compared to lots and lots of clubs at that level. One of, you know, the lowest transfer budgets in the league. Came up with, you know, did some really shrewd business, but at the same time, I think had to play a lot of players over the course of the season who, you know, were trying really, really hard, but are not players who have a ton of championship experience. In some cases, maybe players who don't necessarily have a great future at this level. So yeah, I think to be able to compete as well as we did and not end up in the kind of hole that the Rotherham found themselves in, you know, down at the bottom on 20 odd points by the end, it's a real testament to, you know, the kind of spirit and kind of, you know, shoestring way of doing things that we've developed at the club over the last few years. But yeah, it obviously kind of squeaky bum for it to go down to the final minute of the final day. But like I said, I think you'd be hard pressed to find anyone who would have said that was a bad outcome at the start of the season.
Look, considering you lost your manager to Stoke City halfway during the season, in around one of the busiest times in the Championship, and the shoestring budget that you work on, of course, you rely on a lot of sort of loan players, and you will be again next season. By the looks of it, I mean, you've done very, very well to stay in the Championship compared to some of the budgets that you're up against. So fair play in that regard. What style of football were they expecting to play under Ian Foster? Just so we sort of get an idea of the setting that Devine and Phillips were walking into. Of course, Ian Foster took over Schumacher's job.
Yeah, so Schumacher actually plays a style very similar to Big Ange, and I think that I'm right in saying that they have personal connections. I think that Shui went up to Celtic and sort of, you know, observed him taking training. But it's a very, very similar style that we sort of started the season with, which is very gung-ho, you know, very, very attacking, try and just sort of punch teams quickly with a 1-2, very open football, very counter-attacking. So kind of a similar, obviously, I think we had to cut our cloth a bit differently this season to the season before, given we were competing at the wrong end of the league, and the way that setup looks obviously is a bit different when you're competing more at the top end of the league. So not identical to Ange Ball, but you know, quite similar. And when he walked out, you know, the ownership of the club, the leadership of the club were very clear that they see, you know, being an attacking side as part of our ID, and that they wanted to get someone in who would continue that legacy. And so Foster came in. You know, we were sort of promised attacking football. and it just never really happened under him. The sort of system changed. At first, it looked like for the better, arguably, because we had been quite leaky at the back. But he came in, sort of quickly managed to tighten up the defense. I think we conceded 2 goals in his first 3 games, and got 7 points out of those games. So while the kind of attacking side of it was a bit more circumscribed, it looked like we had traded that for greater defensive solidity. But as the months went on, the attack kind of floundered a little bit. Morgan Whittaker, who is our star man up up behind the striker who had scored, I can't remember exactly how many goals by Christmas, but a lot, definitely double figures by that point. Stopped kind of having the same amount of time on the ball. Finn Azaz, who you mentioned, that we've used the loan market rate. He was a player we had in League One, and then we got him back from Aston Villa on loan in the summer, and he sort of turned kind of unexpectedly into one of the best players in the entire division. I mean, his ability to pick sort of unlock a defense was kind of integral to the way we played football before Christmas.
Got himself into the Ireland squad off the back of it as well.
Yeah, well, he sadly was. I mean, obviously, he played the loan market, and this is what happens. He was recalled, so they could sell him to a higher bidder, which was Middlesbrough. So, he was a huge loss, and I think we'll come on to this when talking about Devine, maybe. But he was someone we never really replaced in a like-for-like way, and I would argue that was probably always going to be a very difficult ask because of how good and what kind of weird player Azaz is. Someone who is incredibly mature, almost like a kind of throwback player for someone who is so young, not hugely pacey, but just has incredible vision and kind of calmness on the ball and that amazing kind of ability to again, like I said, unlock a defense. So we lost that, and the style became, as a consequence, more defensive. We started losing games 1-0. We started losing at home a lot of the time, which was something that was very alien to us because we'd had a phenomenal home record under Schumacher, both in League One and also in the Championship. So it sort of all went a bit downhill really after Shuey left. I don't think Foster was intending to play defensive, negative football. I defended him probably later than quite a lot of other Argyle fans did, and have taken some stick for that. But I think there are some who think he sort of saw him as this kind of dogmatic, 1-0 merchant negative type manager, and I don't think that was it. I think he tried to play a tighter but still quite energetic counter-attacking style, and I think that was what Phillips and Devine were brought in to help with, and it just didn't work. I think he just proved unable to execute it for one reason or another. Some reasons that are definitely his fault, others that maybe were more circumstantial. And as a consequence, it appeared negative, and it certainly was a very different style to what we had been used to. Sorry, but then at the end of the season, he was sacked with 6 games to go. Which is a very big move for us because we tend to, pride ourselves on giving managers time and doing things a bit differently to sort of sack happy lower league clubs that shell out a load of money. But we were going down at the time. I think there's no question about that. We were on a horrible run of form. The atmosphere around the club seemed very toxic. And our director of football, Neil Jusnip, and our first team coach, Kevin, one of the coaches, Kevin Nanskiville, stepped in to keep us up. And then that was kind of a weird hybrid of Shuey ball and what Foster ball ended up being, in the sense that Jusnip and Nanskiville had been there the whole time. So there was kind of a bit of a reversion towards trying to do what we did under Shuey, playing more expansive, more attacking football. But we ended up actually having a lot of success winning games 1-0, which is kind of what we were just a fine margin away from not being able to do, or from being able to do, I should say, under Foster. So in the end, we stayed up by the skin of our teeth, winning games 1-0 and keeping things quite tight. But while playing a style of football that actually was kind of, appeared less negative than the style under Foster had been. So it's been a bit of a weird kind of mishmash of different styles and a weird journey for us this season through, a variety of different managers. But that's kind of, I guess, the size of it.
Look, you've navigated it successfully, and you could go again next year. It's interesting, though, that you speak about Schumacher, because I think Tottenham are in a very similar position with Ange Postecoglou, actually, because, with the way Tottenham's season has gone, many fans are wondering whether to stick or twist with Postecoglou, and there is more noises about getting Ange out. And, obviously, if you get rid of Ange, like what happened to you guys, the next guy in the door, that, you're going to sacrifice in times of style, being on the front foot, almost a bit too gung-ho. We concede a lot of goals, similar to what you were saying under Schumacher and that as well. So, what would your advice be to maybe, I know we're pivoting here, but to Spurs fans that are maybe doubting Ange Postecoglou and his style of play being effective and being able to work at Tottenham Hotspur?
Well, my advice would be to keep him, not necessarily based on anything Plymouth related, but just as a football fan who watches a fair amount of Spurs and, like I said, still has a bit of a soft spot for them. Seems to me like he has re-injected some positivity into the atmosphere at the club, at least earlier in the season. Seems like he is building something that's going to take a couple of years to execute properly. And it seems like something that is quite exciting and has a kind of definite philosophy to it, in a league that is obviously unbelievably competitive. And obviously, you're not miles off the top four even now. And I think that's coming at the end of a season that, many observers, myself included, would have expected to be very transitional. So to me, from the outside, it doesn't seem like he's doing a bad job at all. Obviously, in recent weeks, it's been frustrating and there are definitely weaknesses there. And yeah, in the last two games, only starting to play when you're 3 or 4-0 down is not a surefire way to win football matches. But I think it's a work in progress. And, whatever the end destination is, I have a good feeling it'll be better than if you, rashly sack him and try and reinvent the wheel for the umpteenth time. I think in particular also, Harry Kane was such a focal point for you and such, the kind of heart and soul of the team that the first season post him was almost going to be more than replacing one player. It was going to be kind of learning a whole new way of attacking, and that side of things seems to have been very successful. And he seems to have reduced the reliance of the style of play on one individual, which to me seems to be a good thing. So yeah, I would definitely advise sticking, but not sure that my opinion will be being sounded out by Daniel Levy anytime soon.
No, but look, I think it adds weight to it because, like you alluded to, the style of football after Schumacher left, it's the grass isn't always greener on the other side.
Nope.
So maybe a bit of a warning there to Spurs fans to maybe stick through it. Look, let's get back on to Phillips. I mean, he's been a regular in the Pilgrims backline since joining on loan in January. He made 20 appearances, 2 of those as a substitute on the bench. Did Phillips make an impact to your backline since arriving? Did he improve it the way that many people were expecting him to when he arrived?
Yeah, I think certainly. I mean, so he came in for his debut, I believe, at Huddersfield away, which was a huge game for us, both at the time and obviously in hindsight. Huddersfield ended up going down with 6 fewer points than us, but it was only 3 going into the final day. So if we'd lost there, that would have been, that would have kind of months down the line reverberated into the permutations at the end of the season. So he came straight into that game, which was really important. It was also Ian Foster's first game in charge. And he was absolutely brilliant that day. He came in, looked both really assured on the ball for a player of his age, really kind of physical as well, good in duels. So that was a really promising start to his Argyle career. I think since then, there have been ups and downs, as you would expect of a player of that age, and B, a player who is coming into an unsettled situation where we're in transition from one manager to another, one style of football to another, as we've discussed. And I think particularly around the time where the form and the atmosphere around the club kind of really hit its nadir, he didn't look anywhere near as assured as he had done at the beginning. I think there was always a mistake in him, which again, it would be totally unreasonable to expect anything else of someone of his age. But those mistakes started to look a little bit more costly, started to look a little bit more like his head was kind of going in key moments. But again, I think he came massively good towards the end when things picked up again. So I don't think there's any sense in which you can personally, I don't think you can separate him out, and single him out for criticism compared to other players during that period when things were going badly. Now, there are other fans who I know who disagree and who think he was maybe one of our worst players in the second half of the season. I think that's a fairly minority view. Honestly, I've only really heard a couple of people saying it. And it's not one that I share, but yeah, there was kind of a dip off in form, but then towards the end of the season when he was called on, which wasn't all the time in the run-in, I think it should be noted that when we played Leicester, for example, and got a huge 1-0 win against them in the second to last home game of the season, he did not start that game, as far as I remember. We went with a kind of more experienced back line of players who had, I think, largely been at the club last season. But he came in against, certainly in one of the 2 away games that we had, at least one of those, and then he played against Hull at the weekend. And I thought he was absolutely brilliant. We basically had to keep a clean sheet to stay up. If we hadn't, we'd have gone. So, it was a dual effort from that back line to shut down the likes of, Fabio Carvalho, Jaden Phillips and players like that who really, in my opinion, quite clearly are Premier League players, not Championship ones. So yeah, to shut them down, as part of that backline effort was great. I think it's so clear that his attitude and his application have also just been spot on the whole time he's been down here. It's very, very clear to see that he threw 110% into it. That he really cared about doing his best for the club and for the fans. Player who clearly wears his heart on his sleeve. And yeah, I personally think that side of it, obviously is hugely important. Again, particularly at a spell when the club is maybe not at its kind of highest ebb in terms of morale. So that was really nice to see as well. And I think, even some of those who I know who have been a bit more critical of him think that he is going to be a phenomenal player, one day. To come into a struggling Championship team at the age of 18 and play, even with a mistake or two in him, and even though it was fairly inconsistent, just kind of play at all in that setup, I think reveals, like how impressive he is. And yeah, and I think you've got a great player on your hands for years to come for sure.
Interesting, because many Spurs fans are maybe dubious about Ashley Phillips. Can he be a future Tottenham centre-back? Will he ever make the grade at Tottenham? What's your opinions on that? Do you think we have a future Tottenham centre-back there?
Yes, I think so. Or I think potentially. I mean, it's hard to say, isn't it, for certain? But I wouldn't disclose that possibility at the moment. Or foreclose that possibility. Sorry, at the moment. I think I would maybe gently suggest that you already play with a centre back who has a big mistake in him and a bit of head loss, and he is a World Cup winner. So I don't necessarily know if that's a disqualifying factor for Ashley Phillips, but. Yeah, I think obviously it's kind of a cop-out answer, but the next few years of his development are going to be so important, right? It's just very hard to say right now whether any 18-year-old who's on loan in the Championship is going to make it a kind of top 4 even title aspirant club. To say hard to say if any kind of Championship loanee 18-year-old is gonna make it in the long run. But I think he has. I think. What is so impressive about him particularly is the physical side of his game for a player of his age is really, really good already. And I think that if you can continue to develop that side of things, but also just kind of coach more technical things into him, and also, just with I guess with age comes a bit of extra maturity. You start to count a couple of mistakes. I absolutely don't see why he couldn't play for you in the future. Again, not to say that he will, but yeah, I think he absolutely could.
No, that's very reassuring to hear, because I'm a big Ashley Phillips fan. I really like the guy. In terms of Alfie Devine, another player, of course, Spurs signed him from Wigan a couple of years ago, another player that they signed for the future. And a lot of Spurs fans really have high hopes for Alfie Devine, and they still have very high hopes for Alfie Devine. But Devine was in and out of the Pilgrim side this season. He made 15 appearances, including 9 starts. Why didn't Devine quite make the same impact or a similar impact Phillips did? Why didn't he get into the 11 as often as Phillips did?
I think it was a question of being played out of position, or maybe not knowing quite what his best position is at this stage. That was more the explanation for that than anything else. Like I said, we lost Finn Azaz in January, who was really our, along with Morgan Whisker, our key player, someone who was a very attack-minded number 10, not so good off the ball, but just incredible at switching play. Like I said, unlocking a defense, those kind of attributes. And I think Devine was kind of the player who we signed, maybe with the intention of replacing that kind of output. We also signed Darko JB on loan from Leeds, who is another England youth international, and he kind of played sometimes in that number 10 as well. So it wasn't like it was totally on Devine to it wasn't like it was a clear instruction necessarily to go and try and replicate what Azaz has done. But I think that was kind of a little bit the expectation, and that's a shame, because number one, that's a huge it's a huge onus to put on anyone to say come from a team at the bottom of League One basically and immediately step in and replace one of the best players in the Championship, and that would be tough whoever that player was. So to make that ask of someone who effectively is a completely different type of player, while having some similar attributes just in terms of the maturity and quality he shows on the ball, he's not the same type of player as Azaz. I think that was an unrealistic expectation, and it meant that he just kind of looked a little bit like a square peg in a round hole at times. He didn't score for us. I think he did get some goal involvement. He actually got an assist on his debut at home to Cardiff with a little ball back across the box. But yeah, he never really sort of looked a goal threat in the same way that Azaz would sometimes pick the ball up 25 yards out and smash it into the top corner, or get the ball in the edge of the box and curl it into the bottom. Devine never really looked like doing that. And so, I guess that would mean is the other alternative for playing him would be in a midfield 2, because we play a sort of 3 at the back, wing backs, and then 2 and 2 and 1 system. The only other option was playing him in a kind of deeper 2, as opposed to the forward 2, apart from on the rare occasions where we played a 3-man midfield, which we can come back to this, but I think actually probably would be the system that would suit him the best, as someone who's quite a dynamic box-to-box type player. But yeah, I guess in that sort of sitting 2 as well, there was just quite a lot of competition for places. I mean, we have Adam Randall, who's a young local lad who is kind of, he's been a little bit in and out as well, but very much one of the beating hearts of the team. Jordan Houghton, who is a very talented, kind of quite conservative defensive midfielder who's really been excellent for us this season. And we signed Adam Forshaw, who I think Spurs fans might know a bit about from his time in the Premier League at Leeds. The only, I believe, former league player, also the only player in our squad who's played a lot of minutes at Premier League level, and someone who has phenomenal quality. The reason he's for us and not higher up is because his legs are made of glass, unfortunately. So he was in and out as well, but for that, more for the injury reason than anything else. So I guess Devine just didn't get a kind of consistent opportunity to force his way into the 2 either. And then, as I mentioned, we also had GB on loan for Leeds, who kind of played in both the 10 and the 4, or the 8, as it were. So I'm just a bit congested, but I said this on our podcast the other night. I was really frustrated that Devine came in on the final day in the midfield 2, and he was absolutely brilliant. And I think it just showed what we have been missing by not playing him in that deeper lying role. His retention of the ball was brilliant, progressed it incredibly well, just had a great engine to get kind of back and forward. So I definitely think that is, of those 2 positions, the more advanced or more deep lying, I think he definitely looked more at home in that one. And I think it just took us until too late either to realize that, or to be in a position where we wanted to give him that responsibility as opposed to someone else. So I think that was probably mostly what it was. I will say he also did have not his finest moment in a game against Bristol City on Easter Monday, which was really the absolute nadir of the Foster era, and he was sacked that evening, in fact, where he lunged in and got sent off in a moment that was just really kind of petulant. And again, like, exactly the sort of thing you'd expect from a young player, but not something that was massively helpful, not something the fans were particularly impressed by, I think it's safe to say. And that, of course, earned him a suspension. And then while he was suspended, we actually went and won a game for the first time in months. And I think that probably set back him, getting back into the team in the run-in. But, he did force his way back in. He came on as a substitute at Stoke when we were 2-0 down, and played dreadfully, and then he was actually, by far and away the only bright spot of that second half performance. Whenever he got on the ball was the only time we looked at all threatening. And then, like I said, came in for the whole game from the start, which was maybe a bit of a surprise, and he really stood up to the occasion. So I'd say that was probably what it was down to.
No, look, it's been a very frustrating sort of season for Devine. He spent the first half alone out at League One with Port Vale, and then, of course, got drafted in by Forster to Plymouth. And, it looked like it was starting off well. It looked like it was going to go well. But like you said, with the sending off, he sort of had to earn back the trust to be rewarded back into the lineup. And it took his time and stuff like that. But interesting that you cleared up what you think his best position is, because actually at Tottenham in the preseason, when we brought him out in preseason, he was actually playing out on right wing. And he done all right out there, but I think it left many Tottenham fans sort of thinking, what is his best position? Is he a cam? Is he a deep lying sort of midfielder? Is he a right winger? So it's good that you sort of cleared that up, that you see that holding role as his best role. And interesting going forward.
I think that's his best role in the system that we typically play. As I sort of briefly mentioned, for me, where I think he would have the most impact is in a midfield 3, where you've got one who sits, one who really attacks, and then one who is kind of does either of those things or both as demanded, and kind of uses their engine to get back and forward, like a classic number 8, I guess. For me, that would be his best position, and that's a system that we have sometimes, but it's not a system that under Foster or indeed the caretakers who came after him, we kind of typically played. So I'd say he's definitely better as a deeper lying midfielder than a kind of number 10. But I think he would be even better if he got a consistent run of games in a 3 or some kind of system that allowed him to be a bit more box to box. That for me would seem to be his best position.
No, 100%. I definitely agree with that. And as well, same with Alfie Devine. I mean, like I said, Tottenham fans have had huge hope for this kid, to come through and break it into the Tottenham side. I mean, do you consider, from what you've seen, Devine a future Tottenham player? And if not, what do you think he really needs to add to his game?
I'm less sure about him than Phillips, I would say, at this moment in time, probably. We're actually having this debate. We've had this debate a few times in the group chats. And at times I've sort of said, I think, Devine might have the better career than Phillips. And I guess today I'm coming down on the other side of the ledger, having thought about it a bit more for this podcast. But I think, Phillips's attributes are a little more easily identifiable. His kind of utility in a team is a little bit more easily identifiable. And I guess I've just seen over the years fewer 18-year-old centre-backs that really impress me than I've seen 18-year-old midfielders of kind of indeterminate exact position, right? So I guess maybe it's a little harder to say, that type of player will break through. I think it probably depends what level you're at. Could I see Alfie Devine figuring in a Spurs team that finishes like 8th or 9th in the Premier League? Yes. Could I see Alfie Devine playing in a title-winning side? Have a harder time seeing that. But again, it's just very, very difficult to say because he's so young. I'm in very little doubt that he will have a very good career, whether it's at Spurs or somewhere else. I think, and have consistently said, that I think he has a Premier League future, definitely, even when, a number of our fans were maybe a bit more down on him. And while he is a very different type of player to Finn Azaz, I think, like I said earlier, they share an incredible maturity for their age. And Azaz is a couple of years older than Alfie Devine even. So, the guy's got phenomenal quality on the ball for a player of his age. I mean, really just very mature, very composed, doesn't really give it away too much. Certainly didn't at the weekend, uses it very well. So I think if you can iron out his kind of progression play, if you can add goals to his game, depending on what midfield position you want to use him, and I guess will depend how important that is. But yeah, if you can just add a bit more end product, again, I certainly would not rule it out. For the reasons I mentioned, though, I guess I just have a little bit of an easier time imagining Phillips slotting into it. But no, Devine could, and even if he doesn't, I think he has a career as a high-end championship at worst player. And certainly in a Premier League one otherwise, and maybe a high-end Premier League one. But I guess we'll have to wait and see with him as well.
You might have dashed a few Spurs fans' hopes for him there, my man. But look, last but not least,
I hope not. I don't want this to be a negative takeaway because I really, really like him a lot, and I could be wrong, and it could be him who has the great career and Phillips who doesn't. I think they're both really exciting players that you've got on your books.
Well, look, I'm definitely excited by some of the youngsters that are on the books, especially these two as well. But what do you think is next for Devine and Phillips in terms of next season? Now, I know Plymouth Argyle have already expressed an interest in both of the players returning next year on loan for another season. Would they benefit from another loan at Plymouth? Similar surroundings, another year in the Championship. Should they be loaned out to a team higher up in the Championship, or should they be brought on pre-season tour? And should Tottenham take a look at them?
I think they could both benefit from another loan for sure. Again, this is all very contingent on who's in whose plans and what positions teams might be short on. And, we had a fullback on loan from Aston Villa earlier in the season called Kane Kessler-Hayden, who came down and did perfectly well. As a player that fans liked, but he was recalled in January to go into Villa's first team setup, which led to some head scratching, and he has actually got some minutes and been consistently on the bench, for them since then. So just goes to show how difficult it is to kind of tell these things. I don't think he's someone who, again, as well regarded as he was, would necessarily have appeared to be the kind of player mid-season who was going to be recalled to go into a Champions League contention battle. So, these things are just difficult to judge. If you have a centre-back crisis, could you do worse than Ashley Phillips joining you on pre-season tour and seeing if he can handle that level? Absolutely, you could do a lot worse than that. But I think in the ideal world, I think they both, they're both rough enough that you would absolutely want to send them out on loan again. I definitely think you should send them to the Championship. I don't think there's much point sending them to a lower tier than that. There were maybe times when Devine would look like he was struggling a little bit, where I thought that maybe loaning him to a kind of Derby or Portsmouth kind of League One promotion type club would have been more fruitful than sending him to us. But I think by the end of the season, he proved that wrong. So yeah, so I think the Championship is an option. And in terms of who, I mean, it's very hard to say. I mean, so we are in the process of appointing a new manager at the moment, after sacking Foster. It's not very clear who that's going to be. I think our model as a club, try and play attacking football, try and cut our cloth accordingly, rely on loan signings and young players. I don't imagine that changing too much, because I think that's part of a strategic vision that is broader than any one coach. But that being said, that strategy did nearly take us down this season. So there'll have to be some adjustments to it. We'll also be, in all likelihood, cashing in on our most sellable assets, the Morgan Whitakers of the world. I would be very surprised if he's a Plymouth Argyle player on day one of next season. And while, that is very sad in many respects, because he's been brilliant for us, I think very much the plan is, we're not a club who have had big money saleable assets in a long, long time. So to now have them, that could do the world of good for our budget. We could use that money to kind of populate the team with players all over the park who really look like Championship quality players. All to say, should you send them back on loan to us, it's very hard to say at the moment what our team's going to look like. Now, you mentioned that Neil Dewsnip, our director of football / caretaker manager until the weekend, had said that that there were talks ongoing about bringing them back. That could very much just be that we have put in a request to have a Zoom call and we're just going to get politely rebuffed. It could be that that's a bit more advanced. I will say that Ashley Phillips put out a tweet yesterday, I believe, saying thanks for a great time on loan, love the club, whatever. That seemed to be very much a goodbye tweet, but I think players have done that before and ended up back at the same place. So look, I think I wouldn't say that either of them has necessarily impressed me so much that if I was a club coming down from the Premier League, for example, I would think that's a title-winning Championship player right there. But I think they've both done enough where if we can show in the next few weeks that we are ambitious about who we hire as manager, who we bring in, once we've got some of that money from incoming, from outgoing transfers, then if we could turn around to Spurs and say we are intending to kick on and finish mid-table next season, and we see these players as that kind of level, I think that you could do a lot worse than sending them back to us, because we have, I think, hopefully looked after them quite well. And I think we have a generally good record of signing young players, actually putting them in the team and giving them a lot of minutes. There also could be a situation where our aspiration looks very much more like just staying up again, in which case maybe someone higher up the league would want to take a look at them. But no, I think, Plymouth is a good place to send young players. We have a great kind of ethos in the city and around the club. It's so far out on a limb from everywhere else that there aren't that many distractions, I guess. And we're a club that's generally on an upward curve. So for me, I think it would make sense for you guys to consider sending them back, and I think it makes absolute sense for us to consider keeping them both, especially given the pace at which young players have shown, time and again that they can get better. I don't think when Finn Azaz joined us on loan, anyone would have said he was going to look like one of the best players in the Championship in a year and a half's time, but he did. So I could absolutely see a similar trajectory for these two. And yeah, I think we would be a good place to consider helping them achieve it. But we will again see what happens.
Look, the biggest thing about getting these youngsters out on loan is getting them the game time, and they certainly got that at Plymouth. And you could see Ashley Phillips sort of really enjoyed his time there. From what I'm aware of, I think Alfie Devine really enjoyed his time there as well. And I'd have no hesitations, sending them, if that's what they wanted to do, sending them back there for another full season. The only thing I would say with maybe Ashley Phillips is, right now we're a bit short at centre-backs in the club. We've got Romero, Van der Ven, and then you've got Dragushin. They might go and sign one more. I think you've got Adarabioyo who are interested in Lloyd Kelly. Their contracts are coming up, so we might be able to sneak in and get one of them for free. But with us going into the Europa League next season, we're going to need a large squad. And I just wonder, will Phillips be that fifth sort of option in and around the squad? And maybe that's why he said goodbye. Maybe he's been told, he has a chance on preseason maybe to try and take down one of them spots. If not, because we also have Alfie Dorrington around, who's very, very highly rated as well. He can play a left-sided centre-back or right-sided centre-back. So it's between one of them, I feel, who will be kept around next season and fighting it out. But I feel like whoever doesn't get that opportunity, I think you should be straight in to take them back on loan again next season. Because to be brutally honest, I'd rather our players, especially our defenders, be in a team that's going to be asked a lot defensively, to really sort of test them and stuff like that. So, I would say keep an eye on Alfie Dorrington, put the word around the Plymouth board that Alfie Dorrington is one maybe to bring over if you don't get Ashley Phillips back. But look, thank you very much for giving up your time to come over and update us on Phillips and Devine, how they've gone on and where you sort of see their career next season and stuff like that. So I really appreciate your time. He is from Argyle Life podcast, the Green and White podcast. So make sure you do get over and check them out. I know there's a couple of other Plymouth Spurs fans that sort of watch the channel. So tell them why they need to get over and check you guys out.
Yeah, so as you mentioned, we are the Green and White podcast from Argyle Life. You can see the social media handle in the name on the screen at ArgyleLife1886. We're just a bunch of Argyle fans who create a lot of content. And I think we have somehow managed to build up a really good following and viewership. And I'm told by people who bump into me every week at games that they enjoy watching. So yeah, I think we're a place to come if you want analysis and kind of fan reaction as to what's happened after games. We've also got a load of content coming up over the summer, looking back at the season that's just gone and forward to the next one. We all like to talk a lot, as you can probably gauge from my appearance here today. So if you're interested, if you're Plymouth curious in any way, hopefully will be a great place for you to find an entry point to becoming even more Plymouth curious in the future.
Well, look, chances are they might have one or two back there next season, Spurs fans as well. So get over there, check them out. I've actually watched some of their content since I've come across them and been alerted to them. Very good content, by the way. I really enjoyed the discussions and all. And I've really enjoyed the discussion that we've had here today and the information you've given us. So again, thank you very much, my man. I wish you the very best of luck over the summer in your manager search and heading into next season. If Spurs players do end up back on loan there again next season, let's keep in regular contact and get some regular updates going.
That sounds good. Thank you so much for having me.
Oh, perfect. Thank you very much, my man. Guys, that's it from us. Give us your comments in the comment section below. And make sure you also thank this kind gentleman, John, here as well for his time. We'll see you back here very, very soon. As always, come on, you Spurs. In the big hands we trust. We never stop.